Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Random Redshirt Podcast, to a special episode of the Random Redshirt Podcast. I am one of the hosts, Zach, and the other host is Chris. What's up, buddy?
Hello, Zach, my great friend. Hello, everyone around the world and the interwebs. Awesome to be here again, talking about what we love. And I know it's been a little while, but we've been busy. You've been traveling, I've been traveling. We are back. We're so grateful to be back. And this is going to be an awesome special episode that we're going to talk about and go through. And it's going to be really exciting. You and I both need this, my friend, because we have been under a lot of different professional pressures. So this is great to be here. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. This is a special episode. I mean, every
Yeah.
episode that we do, I feel like is special, right? Because we get a chance to sit down and talk about the things we love: Star Trek, Star Wars, everything in between. If this is your first time watching us, be sure to hit the like, subscribe at whatever platform you're watching us on, whether it's YouTube or any other podcast platforms. Be sure to follow us there for the latest and greatest, along with Facebook and Instagram. You can also find us on there. But yes, this is
Wow.
a very special episode because it's not often, if ever, that I can remember, at least in my recent memory, which is not very good, or long-term memory, which is even worse, where we have an event that's taking place in the Star Trek timeline that we have reached in real life. And to me, this is really special. So we decided to pivot for this week to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the episode Past Tense Part One and Two. We were gonna do a deep dive into a Battlestar Galactica episode, but we're pushing that one week because
Hmm?
I think, Chris,
Yeah.
we just felt like this was too good of an opportunity to pass up.
Yeah, this was really cool. And I didn't realize this. And then you had called me and you said, you asked me, did I remember these episodes past tense from Deep Space Nine? And then you started talking to me about the dates. And then you said, hey, this we're coming up on the same dates that this episode past tense one and two actually took place in. And we are now intersecting it. And I said, that's awesome. Let's talk about that. Because I did, I remembered the episode and I knew it was about the um, I knew time travel was involved. They were going back. There was rights involved, and so I thought, hey, this would be yeah, absolutely, Zach. This is a great one to talk about, um, because naturally, right, we're gonna draw draw lots of comparisons, since we have now intersected, um, on Star Trek's Deep Space Nine episode and where we are today at this moment. We're indeed like this day that you and I are recording. So pretty cool.
At the time of this recording, this is September 1st, 2004, right? And
Yeah.
we know in this episode, the Bell riots, it's approximately the 30th of August to September 3rd. In that chunk time is when the Bell riots and things begin to build and build and build and build until the climax where Gabriel Bell is killed during the Bell riots, and that a lasting impact and a huge change in it, and it begins to make progress moving forward into the United States and how they're handling things, and then obviously it's what Cisco calls one of the watershed moments of the 21st century on Earth,
Yeah.
and actually in American history, I think is what he in particular. So here we are recording on in the evening on Sunday, September 1st, the day before Labor Day here in the United States. And here we are, Chris. We are in the middle of these dates that Star Trek says this watershed moment in American history happens, called the Bell Riots.
Mhm. Yeah, indeed. What a and what an interesting perspective that it is, right? Coming from the 24th century and then going to the 20th century. eh, What a shock they would have had, because so many things that they would have taken for granted, right, in the 24th century. They go back in time and they're like, wow, this is like, how is this even possible? How is the world like this? How is the United States like this? How is San Francisco like this? Really, really interesting to see that. Clever that they did it that way, of course.
Yeah, and it's that they're literally traveling back to our time period right
Mhm.
now. And this is what makes this so special, because there really aren't too many moments where our timeline and what we're going through right now is a historical time in Star Trek, right? I mean, at least a fictional historical, because
Mm.
they've gone back in time. You think about Little Green Men, right? Which was a great DS9 episode as well, where the Ferengi get thrown back in time, and they go back to Roswell, right? And that was supposed to be a moment in our history that supposedly actually happened, whether you believe it was an alien landing or not. But this has now become our current time into Star Trek's historical future.
Hmm. This
Or
must have
historical past, excuse me, historical
historical
past.
past. Yeah. And the episode itself must have been written in either 95 or 94. I imagine
Yeah,
that's
it aired in January 8th, 1995. So my guess is maybe sometime November, December they wrote it in 94.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting writing it in 94, projecting, right, what they were thinking. I guess at the time, right, they're going, "Hey, what's it going to be like 30 years
Yeah.
from now like in America? Like what are some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with?" Um and a lot of the same issues that America was wrestling with in 94 are a lot of the same issues that America's wrestling with in 2024. And
Yeah.
that's showing up in Star Trek. So really, really interesting.
And what's scary is that there's many parallels in this particular episode of Star Trek
Hmm.
that is occurring in real time in our lives, in real life, right? We talk about how like, oh, Star Trek's a TV show, it's fake, it's fictional, right? But there's a lot of parallels in this, Chris, in this episode that are occurring right now. There are differences, obviously, but there's a lot of things that you're like, oh, you scratch your head and go, oh my gosh, like here we are. We think we're progressive and we think we've evolved and we've moved past certain things. And we have to a certain extent as humanity, but yet there's a lot of things we're still struggling with, and that's why I think as Star Trek fans, we hold on to that hope of a brighter future that Gene Roddenberry envisioned, right? Where
Hmm.
this kind of stuff that takes place in this episode in past tense part 1 and 2 doesn't happen anymore. But yet here we are, 30 years in the future of the time this episode was written and aired, and we're still dealing with it
Hmm.
in real life. And we're going to
Yeah.
get into that. We're going to get into all that. We got a lot to talk about, a lot to discuss. I know a lot of deep philosophical
Hmm.
discussions as always, but certainly in this episode. But let's go through this, Chris, like we normally do. And we're going to get into the parallels. We're going to talk about the things. And I guess the question I have for you, Chris, and you don't have to answer
Yeah.
right now, maybe think about it, and maybe we can both answer this, as we wrap up this episode. But the philosophical question I have for this that was really weighing on my mind as we discussed doing this and then watching these episodes was, as humanity, are we really better off than we were 300 years ago? So think about it, right? They travel back about 300-ish years, right? Maybe a little bit more, but around like 3 centuries plus into the past, from where they were to get to 2024. And Bashir is the one I think that looks the most shocked and taken aback by what he sees and what he hears and everything going on around him as they've traveled back in time. If we traveled 300 plus years back in time, we're talking the 1700s, would we be as shocked and as taken aback as Bashir was if we were in the same situation? Something to consider as we go through this episode, right?
Hmm.
Because we like to think, oh, we're so much better and more progressive and better off than we were 300 plus years ago. Like, they would think in Starfleet. But are we? I don't know. Maybe we'll answer that question
As we go through it.
as we go through this, as we do this, because to me, past tense part 1 and 2 is a great opportunity, since we are, like you put it eloquently, we're intersecting the Star
Mhm.
Trek universe, right? This is this is a fictional event. This doesn't actually happen in real life. Otherwise, I'd be in San Francisco right now looking for Cisco.
Mhm.
But it doesn't. So because of that, because it's fictional though, we have to look at this episode in an introspective way, I think, and think to ourselves, are we in a better place than what Star Trek was predicting 30 years in the future? Does what is the picture that's painted in this two-part episode, are we better off than what they predicted, or are we the same or worse? And I don't know. That's something I think we really, maybe we answer that. Maybe we, I think I certainly have some opinions and some thoughts as we go through this on that.
Yeah. It, one of the things I do appreciate about Star Trek that I really like is there is quite a few like time travel episodes, right?
Yeah.
Where that they go back or they go in the future, but I think most of them are they're going back.
Yeah.
Um, and I appreciate that because I think I've shared this idea before. Like you and I, we're watching this in the present, right? But these ideas about time, um, and the themes that occur throughout time regarding people and humanity, like past, present, and future, everything is connected, everything exists at once, right? So we're talking about this Star Trek episode and the universe of Star Trek takes place in our future, but they're going to our to our present, but which was their past, but we were creating this universe in our past, like in the 90s. And I just I love that these ideas, past, present, and future, because they're timeless ideas. They they allow us to reflect on where we've come from, what we've learned, what we yearn and want to seek to learn, um, and that connectivity of all of these themes and all of these patterns as once, because everything is connected. So I love that Star Trek allows us to kind of explore those different patterns. So
Yeah.
you got me thinking about like those lines, so appreciated that. Sure.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before in previous episodes, and this is not what I'm about to say is not anything earth-shattering that people are like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that. But Star Trek, I think, has always done maybe too good of a job of predicting things, right? You're talking about shows that were written, at least for Legacy Trek, right? From TOS
Mm-hmm.
through Enterprise, shows that were written, anywhere from the 60s to the 90s and early 2000s, and they predicted some things, right? This is an episode that predicted stuff 30 years in the future. Now here we are 30 years in the future, and my goodness, there are things that they got right.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not quite to the level of The Simpsons, because I'm not a Simpsons fan, but Matt Groening, or however you say his last name, the guy who created The Simpsons, he has to be a time traveler. They have predicted too much crap in The Simpsons and gotten it right for him not to be a time traveler. But anyways, that's a
Yeah.
side story. So let's jump into this, Chris.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack here and a lot of parallels to discuss. But yeah, the episode starts out at the Defiance on its way back to Earth, which is not very common. It doesn't, they don't make their way back to Earth too often, although there's a two-part episode in season 4 called Homefront and Paradise Lost that are incredible, and they're back
Yeah.
on Earth. But they are on the way back to Earth because apparently the senior staff from DS9 has been asked to speak at the annual Starfleet Symposium on the current situation in the Gamma Quadrant.
Makes complete sense. Yeah. They've got to go back and they've got Cisco's the most qualified to be able to talk about that.
Yeah.
On the way, I thought on the way they're going back, they get a message, don't they? Like a request, an emergency communication from Quark, which I
Yes.
thought was pretty cool. It was
Yeah.
pretty cute.
Yeah, it really was. And what's funny about that is the quoting of the rules of acquisition,
Hmm.
right? Where here's Quark trying to throw rules of acquisition at Cisco, and Cisco's like, yeah, he's like, he does admit that the Grand Nagus owes him a favor, and Quark begins to quote the rule of acquisition number 111, which is what? Do you remember
Oh,
what it is?
what was that? What was that? Let me look it up. Trying to find it. I don't remember it right off the top of my mind. Treat people in your debt like family. Exploit them.
Yes, which is
Yes.
hysterical, right?
Ah.
Because remember, before DS9, the rules of acquisition did not exist as far as I can remember. I don't think there's any rules of acquisition in TNG, because TNG, the Ferengi were like these weird, like space pirates with these weird, like whips
Hmm.
that they did,
Yeah.
these pain whips or whatever they were. So the rules of acquisition, literally, as they're being quoted for the first time in DS9, are being created as they're being written in. They're just making up and they're throwing these random ones in. And I think Ira Stephen Bear and his writing staff were so incredibly creative making up these rules as they went along in the show, you know?
Yeah, they
And
were.
then, and so Cisco admits he owes him the Grand Nagus a favor, but then he
Yeah.
also reminds Quark of the rule of acquisition number 217,
You
which
can't,
is you can't
yeah.
free a fish from water. and Quark grins about that. And so there's this mutual understanding between Cisco and Quark on this. And I just think it's funny. The person who gets the most pissed off by Quark using an emergency channel, shocker, is Major Kira.
Yeah. Um, yeah, Commander Cisco's just kind of amused by it. And
Yeah.
what I liked about that whole exchange with Cisco and Quark is um you this is the sense that I got. You go like, because Cisco says, "Yeah, I've been reading it. He says something like, I'm not all the way through, but I've been reading it." But because he's been reading the rules of acquisition, to me, that showed, oh, he's got, because that's a lot to do, right? So
Yeah.
he's got a lot of respect for that culture. So he's like, okay. And I think Quark felt that. So
Yeah.
because you're right, you said it perfectly. They had mutual understanding and then mutual respect right there.
Yeah. Well, I think it helps too that, his son's best friend is a Ferengi, right? And Nog.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
that's right.
you know, trying to understand why his son's friends with a Ferengi and trying to understand the Ferengi culture. He's got a Ferengi on board the station that lives there and runs a bar, and he's got, Rom and everything else. So I think you're right there. I think it's
Yeah,
this is Cisco showing some level of respect for the Ferengi culture. He doesn't have to agree with it, but he is showing a level of respect to it.
yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So they're getting ready to, they have to transport to the surface, right? So Cisco
Yeah.
and Bashir and Dax, they're going to transport down.
Yeah.
And and yet another transporter mishap that happens when they do transport down.
Yeah. Yep.
And yeah, yeah, this is what I felt. So when they beam down, uh, and then O'Brien and Kira are up on the Defiant, and they beam down, and then O'Brien's like, yeah, I got an error reading like on the transporter, and I'm not sure, like I don't see them they didn't materialize or whatever. I felt that maybe it's just me, but I felt like O'Brien and Kira were just kind of nonchalant about it. Like, oh,
Yeah. Oh, we'll
all right.
figure it out. Well,
Yeah,
we'll
we'll
figure it
figure
out.
it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No, that's true. I didn't even think about that. They really were.
Yeah.
They really, especially O'Brien's like, well, yeah, they never materialized, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's just like, they beam down and something happens, and then they throw in the techno babble, right? Which is
Yeah.
Star Trek is well known for. Voyager probably is the absolute worst for techno babble, but in general, they throw techno babble in to explain, oh, there's this angular confinement beam thing, and all that, which the average person's going to go, what the hell does that even mean? That
Yeah.
the diehard Trekkie's going, oh, well, that's because in this subsystem inside the so kind of a little bit for everybody, right? But yeah, he's kind of dumbstruck, but you're right. They are very nonchalant about it.
Yeah. And I felt that both of them throughout the episodes, they were just kind of like, yeah, you know, they must have materialized somewhere. We'll figure it out. And
Yeah.
then it was like, I'm like, shouldn't they be like a little more worried? But
Yeah.
no.
They didn't I mean, it's one thing if they're like, well, they beamed down, but they just didn't make it to, Starfleet headquarters. They didn't make it to San Francisco. Oh, well, we don't know where they beamed down, but we'll find them, right? Because it's
Yeah.
Earth and we got all this technology. Instead, it's like, no, they just didn't even show up. They're not present anymore. They didn't materialize. And you're like, that means they're gone. Like, why aren't you more worried about this at first? But obviously that changes over time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very, very interesting. I did not pick up on that, but that's great. And then of course we cut to the opening credits, which is, my favorite opening credits. Well, and I don't know. TNG's opening credits is so iconic. I mean, I know TOS is too, but I mean, I grew up
Mhm.
on TNG, so but I love the I mean, I love the first three seasons of
Mhm.
DS9. I just kind of felt like when they did season 4 through 7, they tweaked the intro music a little bit, and it's a little bit, I don't know, it's faster. I don't know. I like the slower, more just kind of
Mhm.
the pace of the first three seasons. But that's
Interesting.
a rabbit trail. Yeah.
I do like it.
So
Yeah, where they
yeah, go ahead.
brought they had the runabout Great. And the wormhole. I liked that
Yep.
one when they started doing that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and then in the later seasons, it became the Defiant
Yeah.
that flew through the space that the station and then entered the wormhole. So yeah, which is cool. I mean, the Defiant's pretty badass. But okay, so we get the opening credits as always, and then
Yeah.
when they cut back in, we see Cisco and Bashir. They're lying on some pavement somewhere, unconscious. They're awoken. That's the right word, right? They
Awoken. Yeah. Awoken's a
awoken,
word.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a word. Okay, okay. I
Waken.
check my
Oh,
check my
yeah.
English. But they're awoken by a couple of uniformed men carrying some guns. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a second, this is not the same. If this is the first time you ever watched it, wait a second,
Mhm.
those don't look Starfleet issue. This doesn't look right. And then they kind of roll over and they don't have a comm badge on. Their rank pips are gone. So obviously something's happened. And Cisco begins to get questioned by the older man with the gun. Excuse me,
Yeah.
with the gun.
Yeah. And they don't have IDs. They don't have papers. So they're like wondering, what does all this means? And the guards, they're kind of questioning their attire, right? I think they make some
Yeah.
comments like they're either wearing pajamas or clown
Yep.
suits.
Yep.
Um, pretty derogatory. Oh yeah, pretty derogatory comments for them.
Yeah, and they're asking for a UHC card or a transit pass, which is not normal. I mean, that's stuff that Cisco and Bashir are like, what? Like, what are you talking about? We don't have any of that. And they're asking what happened to Starfleet headquarters,
Yeah.
and the old guard goes, oh, we got some dims, which
Hmm?
so there's a few slang words that are used in this episode during this period of time, which we don't use in the 2024, but in the Star Trek 2024, they use DIMS, which is it's used for someone that are inhabitants of the sanctuary district. They're usually
Yeah.
people with mental health problems. That's the slang they use. And so this older man goes, "Oh, we got a couple of DIMS again."
Yeah. Yeah, it does. So, and Cisco recognizes that term, like
Yeah.
because we find out later he's been a student of the 20th century, like as a hobby. So
Yeah.
yeah. So he's recognized that, um, and he kind of knows, kind of feels what it's about. And the guards escort he and Bashir away, and then we learn more about Dax on where she is because she's been kind of separated, but she's uh, just a little bit away from them. It looked like she was in a stairwell, and she fares much better, right?
Yeah.
She's found by a gentleman that is kind of smitten and taken and wants to help her out. So he does that.
And if this is the first time you were watching this episode, there's a point when Cisco asks what year it is, and the younger man impatiently tells him it's 2024. And this is where we get to the parallel. We've now intersected into Star Trek historical, the historical timeline. And here we are. It's 2024. It was August 30th, just yesterday, right?
Yes,
Yeah, just
2 days ago.
yesterday,
Yeah,
August
yeah.
August 30th, 2 days
2 days
ago.
ago. 2 days ago. Oh, yeah, I think we had an August 31
Was
this
there a
year. Yeah,
31st? Was
yeah,
there a 31st in August? Yeah, there was. Okay, so 2 days ago. And August 30th, we find out is the first day that they have shown up in the past on Earth in San Francisco. And so here we are, September 1st, 2024, at the time of this recording, and we're right in the thick of what is about to happen here in uh this episode.
yeah, yeah.
But
So
you're right.
they,
You're right, Chris. Dax did fare better, and literally they were up top, and if you just went around the corner and down the stairs, she's right at the bottom of the stairs, but they didn't see her because they're being taken off, right? So she's not that far away. She still had her comm badge. Like you're right, she did fare a lot better.
yeah, completely by luck, right? That
Yes, 100%.
she could fare better.
My question is though, if they were all part of the same transport, I understand there was this issue with the transporter, but why would she beam down, even though it wasn't that far away? Why would she beam down there at the bottom of the stairwell, not right next to them? I know it's
Totally.
worth looking too much into it. It's a TV show, right? But I never really understood that.
Yeah. But it is, I like the idea that this is like pure luck and pure happenstance. Pure
Yeah.
happenstance that Cisco and Bashir like have to undergo and kind of see this net, you know, negative part. They go to the sanctuary city or sanctuary district.
Sanctuary District. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's pure luck, it's pure circumstance that Dax then she is very fortunate, like, and is taken care of, and then you know, everyone around that circle is kind of affluent and ha has things, you know, is
Yeah.
taken care of, can work and has jobs, and they're good part of high society, I guess. So
And that you make a good point. I think that's a very real line in these episodes that the people that were in the sanctuary district were down on their luck, right? They were normal, most of them were normal people who were put there because of situations outside their control.
mhm.
Cisco and Bashir didn't want to beam down in the past, let alone right there where they beamed to. And by luck's chance, as you said, they were found and taken off, whereas Dax was rescued by a good citizen and taken to the, to the normal part of San Francisco to live with, normal people, I guess, or people who at least have a decent amount of money or whatever. But I
Mhm.
I, I just thought of this, Chris. I was just thinking
Yeah.
several years ago, several years ago now, I had the opportunity to, and I acquired the actual costume that the old guard played by Dick Miller wore in this episode, the actual screen used one he wore with the actual Sanctuary District
Oh.
A patch on it and everything. I used to have that, and I wish I hadn't gotten rid of it. But I've always loved this two-part episode. I love time travel episodes. I always thought this one was
Yeah.
great. And I used to have that. I don't have it anymore, but it's nice to have had it here in the episode with us. But yeah, I just thought of that.
That's
Sorry, that was a
cool.
rabbit trail.
No,
Yeah.
you are very connected to this episode. So that's a really interesting detail.
Yeah, connected to this franchise over the years with some of the costumes I was able to
Mhm.
acquire, and I'd have to get rid of them at times and stuff. But yes, I thought I was like, yeah, I actually did used to have Dick Miller's costume that he wore in this episode, which would have been cool to still
Mhm.
have. Anyway, sorry. So yeah,
Yeah. Oh, all
I I
good.
th- I think that you made a good point there. I think that intro where there Bashir and Cisco are taken away, and Dax is a parallel to what kind of happens to some of the people that get put in the sanctuary district. They don't get put there by choice, right? It's
Yeah.
not like one of the guys was a one of the main guys in the sanctuary district was a plant manager, I think he said.
Mhm.
Another guy reveals that he worked for a brewery, things like that.
Mhm.
They were normal people with normal jobs, and then they got laid off. They talk about the how bad the economy is in this and everything, and people are losing their jobs. There's no jobs out there to get, and people are getting put in these districts because they have no money and they're down on their luck. And so I'm
Mhm.
really glad you brought up that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So I think pretty soon, Bashir and Cisco, I might be going out of sequence too. Apologies on that on the episode, but it's coming to me just as memory. Like Cisco and Bashir go to, I guess, a processing center, right?
Yeah.
Or a place like that they
Yep.
go. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah. It almost looks
yeah.
like a DMV.
That is what came to my mind too.
Yeah, it looks like a
Totally came
DMV
to
for
my mind.
processing. And man, they're like, we wait in line for 3 hours. How much longer? I'm like, oh, that sounds like a DMV. That's the Department of Motor Vehicles. If you guys aren't
Yeah.
following the acronym there, like where you have to go get your license or renew your plates or whatever, like it very much had that feel.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? Like you really get the sense there's the younger guard and then the older guard. And the older guard, and you feel this more throughout the episodes, but he's very, very cynical. He's very calloused, right? He's the younger guard has a family, wants to go home to his family, doesn't want to work overtime, but the older guard's like, yeah, I'm gonna get overtime, it's gonna be good. He doesn't really care like what happens to the to Cisco and Bashir, just is there, right? Just he's in it for, I don't know, I don't want to say selfish. Maybe that's not the right word. But he's a very, very cynical like individual, and you see that
Yeah.
in all of his exchanges, like until the end, where he really has a change in his mindset, change in the paradigm.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's I think he's become numb to it, right? Because you think
numbed,
about it, right?
yeah,
He's working around it every day, and it becomes a point where it's like you're just so used to the situation, you're so used to seeing it. You're used to seeing the depravity and the just the utter waste isn't the right word, but you know what I mean, right? He's so used to
yeah,
seeing it, he just becomes numb to it. And I think that's kind of the feeling that I got from him early on in this episode.
yeah. I'm glad actually. I'm really glad that they had a character like that in this episode, because when you think about I mean, the theme in the episode is like, how could we let it get to this, right?
Yeah.
how could we let this happen? Like, open your eyes. How could we let this happen? Because that perspective of innocence, going like, I would never let this happen, right? I don't think I could ever let this happen. But you see this character, you see this old man that's become like calloused by life, that's numb by life, that whatever circumstances, he he was probably idealistic, he was probably innocent in the past, but
Yeah.
all these things happened where like he transformed into something that was letting this happen. Like that was in him, right? So I like that. He's just a normal guy working, but he's I mean, he's part of the problem because he thinks everyone in the sanctuary districts are losers,
Yeah.
and he's got this very, very derogatory perspective towards anyone in the sanctuary district. But he's just like he's just a normal person at the same time, right? That potential is in everybody, no matter how idealistic or they think that they don't have that potential. It's still in everybody.
That's very true. And I look at him too also as someone who it's like, hey, you know, Bashir's sitting there thinking to himself, how could they let this happen? How could they let this happen? But yet the old guard, right? This old guy, he's part of the problem in the sense that all the citizens let it happen. They
Yeah,
allowed all of this to happen, right? They elected their officials. Their officials made those decisions. They sat by and didn't. Yeah, whatever. They're out of sight, out of mind, right? They've cleaned up the streets. Get them out of here. Don't let them come near. You know what I mean? Like it's this
yeah,
idea of keeping things at arm's length, right? And we don't see them day to day. They're kept out of sight. And so all the citizens, right, including the Good Samaritan that helps Dax, which we cannot pass over the fact that his name is Chris,
is indeed, yes.
Chris Briner.
Chris Briner,
So
yeah.
Chris, unbeknownst to him, makes an appearance in this episode with a different
Hmm.
last name and
Yeah.
everything else. But yes, a good citizen named Chris. We mustn't forget that. That this there is a Chris in this episode. There's no Zach, unfortunately, but there's a Chris.
We need to get
Um,
Zach's in these episodes too.
well,
Yeah.
we do have a Dax. I guess that's close to
Ah, yeah,
Zach.
we go. There we go.
Zach, that
Yeah.
maybe. I don't know. Except I'm not a woman. But anyways, um, yeah. So I think it's this idea that as a society, the society has become numb and callous to the people inside the sanctuary district. And like you said, and you made a great point. I think that the guy even calls them losers, right?
Yeah. Calls them
Um,
losers.
so they develop over time this perception, this kind of maybe stereotype or this view of these people that yes, there may be some in the sanctuary district that maybe fit that bill to a certain extent, right? But in
Hmm.
general, many of them are just down in their luck because of situations outside their control,
Hmm.
being laid off, not being able to get a job, the economy's bad, they're broke, they're whatever, right? And I think that the old man is a good representation of the society as a whole, and the younger guard is a representation of maybe possible hope and of the future. of this idea. He's a young man with a family. He wants to go home and everything else, but maybe he does seem to present at times some level of compassion or sympathy or
Yeah.
empathy at least for the people in the sanctuary district.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you that the younger guard is that idea of hope and possible change.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Totally get that.
That's kind of how I looked at that. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah. So as we move through that this obviously, like I said, Dax is rescued by this Good Samaritan, Chris Briner, helps her out, takes her to his office, and they're able to get her a replacement ID ordered. I guess Dax does some computer wizardry
Yes.
to
Yeah.
phony that up because she doesn't have an ID there. And of
Yeah.
course, she's got her spots and she says they're tattoos, which
Tattoos. From
back in the mid
Japan.
90s, tattoos were a thing, but 30 years later, tattoos are way more common on people than they would have been 30 years prior when the episode was written and aired.
Yep. Yep.
So something else kind of predicted there too a little bit.
Was it she that said, was it Chris that said, "Oh, did you get it in Japan?" And then she said, "Yeah, in Japan." Or did she say in Japan? Maybe it was Chris that said, "Did you go to Japan and get them?"
Could have
Maybe it
been.
was that.
Could have been,
Yeah.
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 But this Good Samaritan kind of gets her on her feet, gets her an ID
Yeah.
card, gets her all that stuff, and so she's in a good spot. Of course, she wants to find Bashir and Cisco, but she
Yeah.
doesn't know how to. She doesn't even know where to look. She has no idea where they're at. And it's not till later that she's able to find that. But back on the Defiant, back in the 24th century, O'Brien is having his engineers check the Heisenberg compensators, which is always the kind of cop out for writers to just throw some rando part that might need to be looked at and
That's
do
right.
some. It's always a Heisenberg compensators, whatever reason. And Kira says that she's got news from Starfleet, but it's not good. They didn't actually materialize in San Francisco. There's been no sign of them. They materialized elsewhere. And then, according to the sensors, the transport signal disappeared. But O'Brien says, hey, the Defiance logs show that they did materialize somewhere.
Yeah.
The problem is they don't know where somewhere is until uh, I think O'Brien figures it out, right? Something with,
Yeah.
oh, there's some chronoton particles which built up on
Yeah.
the cloaking devices involved, the ablative armors involved,
Yeah.
and that there was a surge in temporal energy just before the beam out.
Yeah.
And there's your clue that it's not where they materialize, it's when.
When they materialized. Yeah. You see all this combination of all of these technologies is just a recipe for
Disaster.
just disaster,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, you've got this cloaking device. You've got I believe O'Brien says there was like a micro singularity that passed through the solar system that
Yes.
caused a surge in, right, like temporal energy
Yeah.
and the chronoton particles. And yeah, for sure, man. And then
I mean, okay, so right, so this era of Star Trek is taking place about 300 years in the future from where we're at right now, which happens to be the same time period and exact same year and exact same dates in this episode, which is one of the reasons why we're talking about this episode right now because of the historical significance
mhm,
in our timeline, our real timeline. But I think to myself, Chris, okay, yes, the technology we have now, 300 plus years from before in the past, our time, is so vastly different than what it was back in the 1700s, right? Like even something like this cell
yeah,
phone would be mind
magic. Yeah.
mind blowing. It would be witchcraft. It'd be witchcraft actually, probably
Mhm.
back in the 1700s. And I think to myself, 300 years now from the future from now, can we just get a freaking printer to print something we ask it to? I mean, it's 2024, and if I send a job to my printer to print,
Mhm.
it shouldn't sit there and just not do it. So I hope in 300 years they can print stuff if they need to print, and they can actually get it to work. Maybe they won't have
Well,
printers in the future.
it
I don't
it
know.
pr it printed, Zach, but you don't know where it printed or when it
Or
printed.
when? Yes. Yes, that was perfect. That was touche, my friend.
Yeah.
Touche. That was
Oh,
perfect. Yeah. And in
goodness.
this case,
Yeah.
it's true. It's very possible I'm printing crap for 300 years in the future, and I don't even know. They might be getting crap going. What is this? Who
Exactly.
knows? Or maybe I'm printing something on some other country on the other side of the planet. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
true.
That's what I
But
feel. Yeah. Yeah.
you're right, though. I mean, there's so much tech in the future in Star Trek that it's like, how does this kind of crap not happen all the time? I mean, I know there's fail safes and backup systems and things like that, but it just seems like the the amount of opportunities for the tech to go wrong, right, is just there's got to be so many opportunities for things to go wrong. I guess we see that all the time, right?
Yeah.
You joked before we started recording about, it always seems like there's transporter accidents all the time. There's always something going on with the transporter.
There is. McCoy was spot on. He's like, I don't want to be on the transporter. He's the he's just saying he's the only rational person, McCoy.
He is. Well,
Yeah.
look what happened when they transported down onto the city on the edge of forever and they went through that, you know what I mean? And all that. I
Yeah.
mean, the transporter was involved, even though it wasn't a transporter accident, but the transporter leads to no good things. Look at Enterprise, right? How many times did I mean they had to use the transporter, in sticky situations, but for the most part, they took shuttles everywhere. They didn't want to use that crap.
Yeah.
They didn't want to use it. So
It's right,
yeah,
man.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's wild. Lots of tech that can go wrong for sure. But yeah, so the guards now are take Bashir and Cisco to the main entrance of Sanctuary District A, where they come across what looks like overcrowded apartment buildings and cement inside these cement walls, and it's very much a basically a prison, right? It's got walls, it's just here are all the prisoners. Did this episode, Chris, at times kind of remind you of the concept, not exactly the same, but the concept of the movie Escape from New York?
Yes. Yes. I was gonna say the same thing. Escape
Dude,
from New York. Yeah.
this, ladies and gentlemen, and people
Yeah.
who are listening around the world, this is what happens when you become such good friends that you think the same way. You
Yeah.
finish sentences. It's just we think so much alike because we have the same taste, right? So yes, that's what I was thinking of, though. I mean, the Sanctuary District, while it's not a prison per se, but it basically is a prison for the Sanctuary District residents.
Yeah. They cannot leave. They don't have a choice of really of where they can sleep, where they can stay.
They have to
They're
just find something.
they have to find something, right? Their meals are provided like in the mornings, and the meals are provided for them. They've got to go stand in line and be able to get a meal. It's really kind of sad, when they
Yeah.
walk through and then people are just kind of habitating or sleeping directly on the streets or the side of the buildings. Um, as Cisco and Bashir were going to the buildings, they were just looking for buildings to see if they could go in and find a place to sleep. And they kept getting denied, saying, "Oh, you can't go in here. This building is full." And you'd have, I don't know if gang is the right word, but you'd have, different kind of gangs or groups of people that have kind of bonded together, and you'd see that at each building, right? You'd see a group of people that
Yeah.
was like, "No, can't go
Can't come
in."
in. Yeah,
Yeah,
and you get these characters they said to watch out and avoid called ghosts,
ghost.
right?
Yeah,
These are the people that are, they're always looking to try to take advantage of people and steal their stuff, and they would be the kind of the criminal, the idea of criminals,
Mhm.
right? That maybe the outsiders think that everybody in there is like that. Everybody's like Escape from New York
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? And so, but the guards, the older man, Vin is his name, and then you get the younger guard partner of his called Bernardo.
Bernardo.
They're the ones that bring them into this processing center. And Bashir and Cisco realize they're in San Francisco initially because they see the Golden Gate Bridge on the way to the Sanctuary District, right? So they know they're in San
Hmm.
Francisco at least. They know they made it to their destination. They just have realized that they didn't make it when they wanted to be in their destination. And it's they make their way there. They're into the processing center. Vin gives them this paperwork, tells them to fill it out. They're sitting there for a while, and they got a long, long wait ahead of them. Long
Yeah.
wait ahead of them. And in fact, this is where you then get the idea that Bernardo, while one of the guards, is also a human being because he has a wife and kids to get home to.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think this is also around the same time during their wait when, if I'm not mistaken, when Cisco, is looking at the clock, looking at the date, and kind of realizes, starts putting these things together, like, oh, what is this? This date is familiar to me.
Yeah.
And then he goes, oh, this is the date of the Bell riots.
Yeah, because he sees the clock
Yeah,
up on the wall, right? The
yeah,
date, and he sees August 30th, 2024. That's the
yeah.
first day they've arrived back in the past,
He shares that
which was
with
just two
yeah,
days ago, our time.
yeah, that's right. 2 days ago, our time. He shares that with Bashir, and essentially is like telling Bashir, hey, we cannot interfere. We have to let these riots happen. We have to let, Gabriel Bell. And this is where he starts sharing what he knows about Gabriel Bell. Because
Yes.
during the Bell riots, he said Gabriel Bell, they took hostages, but Gabriel Bell was the one that protected the hostages, didn't let any of the hostages die. And that's why, it was so important.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, looking in the memory alpha,
Hmm.
you'll get quotes in here with Cisco explaining to Bashir. He says by the early 2020s, there was a place like this in every major city in the United States. And Bashir says, well, why are these people in here? Are they criminals? And Cisco says, no, people with criminal records weren't allowed in the sanctuary districts.
Ah.
So Bashir says, well, then what did they do to deserve this? And Cisco goes, nothing. They're just people without jobs or places to live. And so Bashir says, so they get put in here. And Cisco says, welcome to the 21st century, doctor.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
And he goes on to kind of explain the sanctuary districts and what's going on, right? He says, so then he looks at the clock, right? And quoting here on Memory Alpha, he also says, you ever hear the Bell riots? And Bashir goes, vaguely. Cisco says it was
mhm.
one of the most violent disturbances in American history, and it happened right here. San Francisco, Sanctuary District A, the first week of September
Mm.
2024, which we are currently in at the time of this recording. And Bashir says, that's only a few days from now. And Cisco goes, which means if we don't get out of here very soon, we'll be caught right in the middle of it.
Mhm.
And if I can read one
Mm.
more, Chris,
Yeah, please.
they go on. So it goes on to say, Bashir says, so just how bad are these riots going to be, Commander? And Cisco says, bad. This is where he explains kind of some of the history of it. He says the sanctuary residents will take over the district. Some of the guards will be taken hostage. The government will send in troops to restore order. Hundreds of sanctuary residents will be killed. And Bashir says hundreds, and there's nothing we can do to prevent it. Starfleet's temporal displacement policy may sound good in the classroom, but to know that hundreds of people are going to die and not be able to do anything to save them. And so Bashir
Oh.
said, or Cisco says, well, I sympathize, doctor. But if it makes you feel any better, the riots will be one of the watershed events of the 21st century. Gabriel Bell will see to that. And then he says, Bell, and Cisco says, yeah, the man they named the riots after, he's one of the sanctuary residents who will be guarding the hostages. The government troops will storm this place based on rumors that the hostages have been killed. It turns out the hostages were never harmed because of Gabriel Bell. In the end, Bell sacrifices his own life to save them. He'll become a national hero. Outrage over his death and the death of other residents will change public opinion about the sanctuaries. They'll be torn down, and the United States will finally begin correcting the social problems it struggled with for over 100 years.
Mhm.
Those that little snippet of historical information that Cisco gives to Bashir becomes a driving force for everything they do the rest of the episode.
Mhm. Mhm.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I just thought those quotes were too good not to read.
No, those were great to read. And Bashir's struggling with it because he's a doctor, right? He wants to help the people that are there. And Cisco is at this point, Cisco's more objective, like
Yeah,
going, no, we cannot interfere. Bashir, do not interfere. Um, so I thought that was great.
yeah, it really is. And they're in there for quite a while waiting to get processed right into the district. and
Yeah,
and we also see a cutback to
yeah,
Dax sitting at a desk in this nice apartment, big window view of the skyline. And she's got some devices she's using to access the computer.
yeah. So I like throughout these episodes, they have the contrast between where Dax is and the Sanctuary District. So uh, very these contrasts were excellent. And
Yes.
you just see the people that are in this affluent circumstance that have everything they want, but you know, that was just happenstance too. And then you see those people that are in the sanctuary district that are just struggling to really live like day by day and struggling to like be recognized as human beings. So that that I really like that contrast and seeing both of them at the same time.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
contrast of the society, right? You have the high society, people who have jobs and have money and are able
Mhm.
to overcome the economy and the issues going on. And then you have the other people who are down in their luck, and it's not because of anything they did wrong, right? Even said criminals weren't allowed in the sanctuary district technically, although we find out one kind of got in and was let go within the district because they felt sorry for her. But in general, they're not allowed in. So it's not that these people and they're criminals, they're people who have had a bad go of things
Yeah.
and they're struggling and they just want the ability to get help, get a job, and live like everybody else.
Yeah.
And this high society is much different than that. In fact, this guy who helps out Dax, his name's Chris Briner, as we mentioned, and he's apparently, I guess, like the CEO or the person who started Briner Information Systems, which gives things access like the internet, which was still in its infancy back in '95 when this episode aired. So the fact that they're projecting the internet as a big deal and
Mhm.
a very useful thing and a consistently used thing was also correct. And the fact that there's all these different channels of information and television and stuff also correct. And so even Chris Briner's like, "Oh, you don't know who I am," and Dax has to kind of play it off like, "Oh yeah, 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 that Chris Briner, ha 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 ha." She has to kind of play dumb because she has no idea who he is. But
I like that it was Briner Information Systems, right? That
yeah,
it was and the
yep,
internet. So I like that because so in 94, 95, we're kind of predicting that there's going to be technologies that connect people or provide more information that kind of share things about the world, which the internet
yeah,
does, right? It
yeah.
completely connects everything. But
That people can broadcast things
yeah,
like now people go live all the time online on social media and they're
yeah,
broadcasting stuff. They were doing that in this episode and this two-part episode as well, broadcasting and like they were on TV almost. And you can do
that's
that
right.
now through things like YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube, even
Yeah,
though we're not doing this live, but you know what I mean. You can this idea of broadcasting out video and audio and things that wasn't other than like a TV station or something, the everyday person wasn't doing that.
mhm. Yeah. So there's this level of interconnectedness, dramatic interconnectedness that was available now in the 2024, our present, that was being thought of and conceptualized in 94 when they were writing this. But in the episode, it's like you've got this great idea of connectedness, but they're also in the episode, completely disconnected by what was happening in the sanctuary district, right? So it's the two extremes. Boy, you can be so connected to everything in the world, but then you're completely disconnected to everything from your struggles of your fellow human being. So
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a really great point because it does seem, Chris, that the more tech we get, the more connected we supposedly are. It really does feel like we are very disconnected,
uh,
because it's this idea of instead of calling somebody, instead of meeting with somebody in person, oh, I'll just shoot them a text.
mhm,
Oh, well, you're connected with them,
yeah,
but you're not connecting with them, if that makes sense. Like you're connected, but you're not really connecting with them. And so I think even people in our own town, we
sure,
can be
yeah,
connected with them, right? But maybe we don't connect in the way people used to prior to all of this tech and all of these things, which, yes, we all have these phones and stuff, but I don't know. There's a big part of me that hates them too. I hate cell phones. I use them all the time, but at the same
yeah,
time, I hate them too because I just feel like and I know if you're listening to it, you can't see it, but I'm holding my cell phone. But this piece of tech, I really feel like has put up a wall between people.
Hmm.
because it's just easier to shoot somebody a text than just to talk to them or to
Yeah.
go see them. You know what I mean? It's just so you're right. I think that's a really great point you made that this they're showing this idea of connectedness without being connected with the fellow humanity.
Yeah. And I mean, I am guilty of it as well, right? Because it's just technology is just ubiquitous, like where we are now.
Yeah, we all are
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
We're all guilty.
And the you you miss the part of human dignity, like because the people in the sanctuary district, right? They're forgotten. They're not they're not
Yeah.
thought about. They're out of sight.
Yep.
And they're not even given the respect of human dignity or compassion in the episode. Wow. It's kind of
And empathy too. Remember we had the
empathy.
not
Yeah.
visitor on and she mentioned the idea of
Mm.
not being like, oh, I sympathize with your needs or I sympathize with your she talked about being more empathetic. And so I think of that in this episode, right? This idea of empathy and
Yeah.
having empathy for the people rather than feeling, oh, I feel sorry for them, I sympathize with them. But instead of just that, it's being empathetic
Hmm.
with it too, right? Um, yeah, I mean, it's you brought up some really fantastic. I'm really glad you brought that idea of connectedness because it really is true. You see that in this episode, and then you think about where we're at because this episode is taking place
Hmm.
right now in our time period, the same exact dates. And oh, by the way, just in case you're concerned, for those of you listening, and we're talking about a time travel episode, the clothes we're wearing are period correct for 2024.
They
Just
are
in case
indeed.
you're wondering, we
Yeah.
are in period correct clothing for this time travel episode. We are wearing 2024 clothing. So
Yeah.
just
We
thought
are.
I'd throw that little tidbit in there. We did dress the occasion for the time period. This, in fact, Chris,
Yeah.
this is the first time we've ever talked about a Star Trek episode where we're wearing the correct attire for that episode.
Ah,
Well, I mean, that's
by
it's a
happenstance. Yeah.
it's a random red shirt podcast
It's random.
first.
That is it. That is indeed. Yes.
Yes, all right. My
Absolutely.
my corniness and cheesiness can go to the
It was
side of the
good.
table for now. But
It was good.
anyways, yeah. So it is. It's really interesting the parallels here throughout this whole episode. And we're seeing this so early on in this part one, right? Of
Hmm.
all the parallels of the message that's being conveyed, while also the way in which they're conveying the episode and the way they're presenting the episode, which I think is really wonderful.
Yeah.
And as we move through, right, so we're back in the processing building facility in the sanctuary district, and Cisco and Bashir are getting processed. They finally made it to the front of the line after being at the DMV for 3 hours or whatever,
Hmm.
right? And they get a picture and they get their hands scanned, and they're not in the system. They can't find them. Gee, I wonder
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. That's
And I
right.
thought it was funny that Vin is the old guy is confused. He's you guys don't exist, and I loved how Bashir's like, well, since we don't exist, why don't you just let us go?
Yeah. He's like, no
And
way.
yeah, and he's like, you have no IDs, no money, you're dressed like clowns. There's the moment where he
Clowns.
talked about being
Yeah.
clowns, and he kind of turns polite and hands Bashir and Cisco the clipboards and says, "Hey, fill out these forms to the best of your ability. If you need an interpreter, if you don't speak English, all these questions, yada yada yada." He's like, "Sit down, shut up, fill them out, and don't come to me with any problems."
Yeah. That's right.
Which is really funny.
Yeah, that's right. And they do, let's see, they do eventually get served, right, by the lady. And
Yeah,
yeah, she's kind of realizing, oh, like, well, I thought you guys were dims, but you're not dims, you guys are gimmies. Another slang term that was there.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Another one. Yep.
yeah,
So DIMS are people that they look at as like people with mental health issues. Gimmies are like people who are normal people just down in their luck, but they unfortunately have been brought to the sanctuary district too.
yeah. And she
And then you have ghosts, which are the the
ghosts.
the the really the bad ones, the ones you want to avoid.
Yeah, that's right. And like her piece of advice to Cisco and Bashir are just like, hey, yeah, we'll try and see if we can line up a job, but be patient. It's not going to happen like
Yeah.
immediately. And so that's kind of her, I guess, advice, general advice to that she gives them. which is
Yep.
not great, right? So,
Yeah. And this is the moment as we kind of going through the timeline of the episode. This is the moment where as they're sitting down and Cisco notices the date August 30, 2024.
okay.
They talk about they talk about the Bell riots, which we read the quotes for that. And unless they find out a way out of the district, they're going to be caught right in the middle of it. And then they talk about the history of it and the Gabriel Bell and the riots and everything like that. And so so the lady that processes them after that is talking about this idea that that the Gimmies are just ordinary people in need of a job and a place to stay, and that the even Bashir's like, well, shouldn't the Dims be in hospitals? But unfortunately, the government's unable to afford to treat them, and they send them in the sanctuary district because, as we talked about before, right, out of sight, out of mind,
Yeah.
just get them out of here. And it's like you said, she wants them to be patient. The district does provide job placements, but it's going to take time because of the economy. She gives them ration cards and says, "Hey, avoid ghosts," which she claims are those who haven't integrated well, which is a nice way of saying they don't play nicely with others.
Yeah, for sure.
And then they leave the processing. Yeah, they leave the processing facility and then they go into the district itself.
Yeah. And so, and I think they do, this is when they go from building to building. This is where they're trying to look for a place like to stay, to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
This is where they meet, I believe they meet the father eventually, that's trying to take care of his son who's been injured. And so they
Yeah, they meet
make
him
friends
because
there.
they're able to make an agreement to get into the building to go up to the roof to get a look at how to
Yes.
get out. And the one guy that looks kind of like Cisco, who you think, oh, maybe he's Gabriel Bell, but we find out he isn't. They trade the clothes to get up there, and then as they're going up to the roof, they run into this gentleman. I believe his name is no, not Britt. What's his name? I can't remember the guy's name that they
Oh, let's
meet.
see. Yeah.
Um, Michael Webb, that's his name, Michael Webb.
Web.
And he's tending to his injured son Danny in the stairwell there, and Bashir's like, hey, I've got a little bit of medical training. Maybe I can I take a look? And so he's able to take a look. But as they're walking around looking for a place to stay, Chris, I found this
Mhm.
interesting. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. So as they're walking around, Bashir asks Cisco something to the effect of, are we really better than say the Romulans or the Cardassians? In the event that something disastrous happens to Starfleet, would they really stick to their ideals or would they resort to this kind of setup, right? This kind of environment that they're walking through right now and the way in which they act as humanity. And I found that interesting because we've talked about this in Battlestar Galactica where the idea of is humanity really worth saving? Right? I think isn't it Adamo who says something
Yeah.
effective of is humanity really are we really worth saving? And so I'm curious in your thoughts about that, Chris, about are humans truly different than Romulans and Cardassians? Would we really act differently with this idea, the Starfleet, morals and codes?
Thank you, because this was the quote I was thinking about when Bashir and Cisco were walking down the street and Bashir's talking about ideals, right? And idealism.
Yeah,
And at this moment in the episode, Cisco's still kind of like, Bashir, I don't want you to interfere with the timeline, Bashir, because got to make sure the timeline like is everything's okay. And Bashir's kind
yeah,
of looking at it from an innocent, idealistic perspective. I'm like, well, all these guys are like they're suffering, and we should do something to help with their suffering. And are we any like different, like you say? Um, and this is this is explored in a lot of different types of fiction and other science fiction, right? Or do we adhere to our ideals when our circumstances are challenged or we are going through some sort of suffering, um, and um, our surroundings of what we are used to are dramatically changed. So, like if the Lord of the Flies,
yeah,
where the boys are, you know, um, they kind of resort to this
Like an animalistic state.
yeah, this state of animalism and anarchy, and where there is like ideals and values kind of don't like exist, right? They kind of go away. So there is a good amount of maybe training or foundation that has to happen for humans, but we're, completely capable of it when the foundation is there, and when we've been trained, and there's a lot of of study and introspection, the ability to keep to those ideals is completely there, even during times of um, adversity or challenge or struggle. But when that has not been like reinforced, um, then there's that potential for anarchy, like to happen, like you were saying. So there's both the great on the extremes, the great potential that that humans have to, yes, even through the worst of the worst, adhere to the ideals and perform and respond according to these great ideals, um, on the great side, and on the lowest at the end on the bad side, that also that potential to go, oh, without that kind of discipline, you could just have complete terribleness like happen and everything like unravel. So it is both potentials, I think, like are there, but as, and I think Star Trek shows this, like as humanity kind of evolves, you see this reinforcement of um, values and ideals and what is precious to being human. So
Yeah.
that's why you keep going, and in the 24th century, like they've got these great ideals of like equality and diversity, and trying to uplift like everyone. And in this 21st century, you know, it's not as refined, of course. They're not there yet, right? So you've got the people that are very affluent and have a lot and still have capacity for kindness, but still have capacity for disconnect and dispassion and ignorance. So
Yeah.
maybe I was kind of saying both are the answers, Zach. So it's kind of saying both ways, but yeah, yeah. As
Yeah,
I
no,
was
I mean
kind of thinking.
you're not wrong. I mean, it's this I look at this episode, well, this two-part episode, and I think to myself, what they're portraying in this isn't really in a crazy amount different than what's currently going on in reality.
Mhm.
Yes, there are
Yeah.
differences, of course, but there's a lot in here that's like, well, we're not far off, or maybe we are. Because yeah, you're right. When things are going great, humanity can be amazing.
Mhm.
When things aren't going well, I mean, go watch any movie, any either apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic movie, whether it's an asteroid hitting the planet like Armageddon or Deep Impact, or
Yeah.
the movie Greenland or whatever. Any of these movies where there's some kind of horrific event, or the day after tomorrow, or any of these things. Right now, I know a lot of those are like natural phenomenons, but just regardless, right? Something that has some kind of catastrophic event, or is going to have a catastrophic event on Earth, and look how people respond. They instantly regress to almost an animalistic style where it's everybody for themselves, and like, robbing and stealing and killing, and, I mean, all these things, right? And so, yes, I think as human beings, we have a great capacity for compassion, for empathy and sympathy. But we also have a great compassion for harm, or a great ability to harm and be harmful. So there's that, like you said, there's that one end and the other.
Mm. Yeah.
And this episode, honestly, it's because this episode isn't so far in the future. I don't necessarily think this is an episode that would have been way off if like the Gene Roddenberry would have been like, oh no, this is no, because this is still, I think, would have been close enough in the future to him
Hmm.
that it could have still
Yeah,
been something where it's showing humanity going through and still working through issues to get to that future utopian view of things, right?
agree.
And this, yeah, this idea of this watershed event, right, that does begin to eventually change and force the United States to change the societal issues and problems that they've had for a long time, right, for about 100 years or so. But yeah, as we move through this episode, there's a scuffle in the an alley that Bashir doesn't allow, or Cisco doesn't allow Bashir to get involved in because, like you said, the whole
Yeah,
timeline thing. They end up going to sleep the next day, and Cisco goes and waits in line and gets some scrambled eggs and a piece of bread for Bashir to eat. And I remember when he's sleeping up against that concrete
well,
wall,
yeah.
Bashir's like, I promise never to complain about DS9's Cardassian's beds again. And so, this is where they go looking to get up to the roof. They meet Michael Webb and his son Danny, who obviously Webb plays a big role later.
Yeah,
Uh, and they go upstairs and look around, and they come back down and realize, oh boy, we're not gonna get out of here. And they basically try to keep Michael Webb at a distance, right? They're just trying to get
yeah,
themselves through this to not interfere with history. And unfortunately, they're going to later. But we also see Dax and Chris
yeah,
again at some high class party, and you start hearing things about these different groups and stuff, right? You hear about, in fact, one of the people at the party mentions that Europe is falling apart, right? This idea of political anarchy in Europe, um, which is, I mean, there's some truth to that in real
mhm.
life, I think, in certain regards. But I think Chris also, not you, Chris, the other
Yeah,
Chris,
yeah.
also mentions this idea of the neo Trotskys or something like that. So you're
Hmm.
hearing about other
Yeah,
groups that are taking up, maybe not rioting, but they're taking up this idea of trying to address societal things. And really, ever since COVID, Chris, there's been a lot of groups around the world that have taken to the streets in their countries, and they've done things in order to raise awareness or bring attention to their government of injustices or things that are going on that you're seeing in this episode actually happen to a certain extent.
yeah, you are. And that's natural, I think, right? Like throughout history, you've seen different
Yes.
groups kind of
Yeah.
protest or bring awareness on their different causes. So that is certainly there. And I think the writers of this episode recognize that, hey, there's going to be things, potentially around the world. There could be some things like in Europe that might happen. So let's put it in this episode. Let's kind of um uh make it a thing. And it's the high class kind of people that have that awareness of these other things in the world, these kind of like high level things that are happening in the world, right? Because their own personal needs like are being met. So they don't have to worry about just survival because they're surviving quite well. Now they're just worrying
Right.
about, hey, what's the political like circumstances of the world that's happening today that kind of pique our interest. So
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, right? United States, here we are. This country got its start from what? A revolution. The
yeah,
colonists rose up against the British crown.
yeah.
That's how the United States got to start, right? Declaration of Independence, 1776. I mean, that's how it started, right? They declared their independence from the British crown, and the Revolutionary War happened. And
Hmm.
the colonists, the citizens of this United States of America, rose up to fight what they felt were the injustices of the crown and why they got away from the crown
Hmm.
and started their own country. And you're seeing what appears to be in this episode things popping up around the globe, right? Of stuff happening and these groups rising up in order to say, not so fast. Like there are certain societal injustices that we believe are taking place. and we
Mhm.
don't like it. And the Sanctuary District is just one example in this episode of that type of stuff that's happening
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
in Star Trek's 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. This part one is where they see, let's see, there's some scuffling that happens, right? I believe some
There
scuffling
is
that,
right towards
yeah,
the end of the episode.
yeah, that Cisco and Bashir get involved with.
Yes.
Yeah. And Gabriel Bell, or who we find out is Gabriel Bell, tries to help out
Yep.
because,
He tries to protect them,
yeah, he does. He
Cisco
tries to
and
protect them.
Bashir, and he's stabbed and he dies. And the only reason they find out is because of his card or his ID
Yeah.
or whatever, and it says Gabriel Bell. And you can tell when they find that out, they're both like, "Oh no," because right. So Bashir and Cisco have had that discussion about the importance of Gabriel Bell and the riots
Yeah.
and what happens in this period, this moment of time in from between August 30th and September 3rd, 2024, and he dies. And then, I mean, that's you talk about a weight now right on their shoulders. And then you get into the very end of the episode where back on the bridge, O'Brien and Kira,
Kira.
are trying to get permission to go try to find them through time, through, recreating the events with the transporter. And, they're told no, but then they try to raise them again. They try to raise Starfleet again
Oh,
to
yeah.
talk about it. And they're like, we've been cut off from Starfleet security. And then all of a sudden they're just gone. Right. So
That's
that
right.
moment, that instant in time, Gabriel Bell dies, the future has changed for them. They're, of course, somehow protected from the change in the timeline. And now they're gone. Starfleet's gone. It's all gone. They can't contact Starfleet. And so uh they so now by realizing that, Cisco and Bashir go back to Michael Webb and they say, hey, they want to join
Yeah.
this rebellion, right? So they know that now they're going to have to do something to make sure this happens.
Hmm.
And uh this is when the takeover of the processing center begins, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Riots break out, people living in the district. They take them hostage inside the processing center. They got Cisco's able to get a shotgun, and he steps up and he says, My name is Gabriel Bell."
That's right. And Bashir kind of looks over at him going,
Yeah,
oh boy.
yeah, because Cisco realizes he's got to do something. He's got to now.
Yeah.
He has to play the role of Gabriel Bell, and I wonder, Chris, if Bashir's going, but Gabriel Bell dies in the riots. Like, are you planning, like, in his head, right? Like, is he planning to sacrifice himself now to ensure that this historical watershed event of the 21st century happens? Because he doesn't know, right? They have no
Yeah.
idea they know what's coming. They don't know how their role in it is going to take place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have a feeling that Cisco, yeah, maybe he wasn't sure if he'd have to end up sacrificing himself or not, but he was willing to do, whatever he could to help out with the situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So that concludes part one as we go to a to be continued section of it. And we
Yeah.
roll right into part two, where now Cisco has to take on this incredibly important role, or he's decided to take on. That'd be like going back in time, right, Chris? And it's like, okay, George Washington's been killed, and now you have to step in and play the role of George Washington.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Right?
General Washington. Good luck, General. Yeah.
Yeah, good luck,
Go
General.
for it.
Yep, thank you, thank you, thank you. It wouldn't matter back. They all wore wigs back then, right? So who cares? It wouldn't matter. But because I don't have the white hair he would have had in those wigs. But yeah. So it's um that's a big deal, right? To step into the shoes of a historical figure that, while maybe he's not the most well-known historical figure to a lot of
Mhm.
everyday Starfleet officers, maybe unless they know their history really well, but he is important to the future,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
what takes place and the changes that will come about from the riots and Gabriel Bell's death.
Yeah. And Cisco being who Cisco is completely, I think this is something that he really identifies with, that when it comes to social change, like Cisco is someone that he takes that to heart. He wants to be in the right place. You know, now
Yeah.
now that the interfering with the timeline's completely gone, he's he's completely gonna go in there to try and save the day. And this is what Cisco's gonna do.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
yeah,
And
for
and
sure.
so the beginning of the episode picks up from the last one, and it shows them moving the hostages, which are the workers of the
Hmm.
processing facility, right, and the guards, into that building. And Biddle Coleridge is the guy with the long hair who they
Yeah,
first saw in the alley beating the guy up, and he's been kind of a nuisance. He's considered one of his ghosts. That he says, "Hey, shoot anybody that moves." And so now you have Cisco here who's attempting to take control of this situation and trying to convince Biddle that they need to keep these hostages alive because they are the bargaining chips.
yeah. And throughout this episode, you get a lot of the conflict and engagement between Biddle and Cisco. And Cisco's really he goes right to the edge. Like he's willing to shoot Biddle, like I think a couple times
Yeah.
throughout the episode, right? To
Yep.
say no, he was not gonna back down. So I really liked that, like uh, about Cisco because he's completely um committed to trying to restore the timeline. Well, I guess in his view, he hasn't altered the timeline yet, but committed to um the whole cause of the riot, and he takes it
Yeah.
to heart. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, think about it though, too, Chris, right? I mean, how scary would Biddle be to Cisco when he's dealt with Cardassians, Romulans, Klingons, the Jem'Hadar, Vorta, uh, Ferengi, you know,
yeah,
he's dealt with a lot. Do you really think some punk guy is really that scary? I mean, he knows, right? It's a volatile situation. He knows
yeah,
that he's got to tread lightly. He's got to be careful. And by tread lightly, I don't mean like be timid, but you know what I mean? He's got to be real careful with every decision he makes, every move, everything he says. He knows that if like as much as one hostage is killed, it could drastically change and alter the future. But I don't think he's really intimidated by Biddle at all. Just from the sheer fact of the people and the things like the prophets of the wormhole aliens that he's had to deal with just in the last 3 years alone on since he got the assignment on DS9.
yeah. He wouldn't have been intimidated by Biddle, and so it was actually the opposite. Biddle is pretty intimidated by Cisco when Cisco kind of threatens him and say, "Don't do that." So Biddle steps down pretty quickly after that, going,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay,
And he
yeah,
tries to play out things off like Cisco get real direct with him, and Biddle will kind of play off like, "Oh, I was just joking." He's like, "All you gimmies are have no sense of humor and all this stuff," and just very kind of like lightening the mood. But as we go through part two, by the end, I kind of sort of found myself starting to like Biddle a little bit towards the end.
he does a
Um,
really yeah he does a really nice thing with Webb's son, and you know
yeah,
when
with the
Biddle's kind
hat.
of with the hat when Biddle's kind of realizing that, oh, okay, I don't think they're gonna get out of here. Like the National Guard's coming. Um, he gives the son the hat and he says, "Hey, looks good on you, kid." So that was good. So he does kind of he does shift like throughout that episode. And to Biddle's credit, he does, he never turns on Cisco or Bashir.
Yeah,
He never turns on them. Um, so I do like that. I also thought it was interesting that the older guard, I'm forgetting his name. It was
Vin,
Vin.
Vin, yeah, yeah,
Throughout most of this episode of part two, he still um has that attitude, right? He's arrogant, he's looking down on them. He's like, "Hey, you guys are still a bunch of losers and
yeah.
a bunch of dims," and he hasn't shifted yet. And
He almost gets himself killed multiple times.
mhm,
Like I mean, Cisco really has to go to bat. Cisco really does kind of have to be Gabriel Bell, and he's so hell bent on protecting every single one of those those hostages because he knows the importance of all them being alive. I mean, my goodness, I was literally yelling at my TV. I'm like, shut up. Like, stop. You are going to get yourself or others killed because you don't stop running your mouth. So you make a great point by bringing that up.
And there's people like that. So what I like of the writers that have done that, that's yes, there are people like this, right?
Yep.
And Cisco goes all the way. Cisco saves his life pretty much and like picks him
Yeah.
up and says, "What are you doing? You know, you need to stay. I'm trying to save you. I'm trying to save your life." And and at and he says, "Well, what do you want me to do?" Like this is near the end. What do you want me to do? Like feel bad for these guys because they had a hard break? And Cisco says, "Well, that would be a start." And
Yeah.
I like that.
That was a really good point.
Mhm.
Cisco is livid at this guy. I mean, he's chucking him around the inside the room and everything like that. I mean, Cisco just can't understand why he. It's this idea, right, of someone who has a prejudice and just can't get past it.
Yeah.
And somebody else is coming to this person saying, look, you have this prejudice, you need to knock it off, whatever. And the guy, and you say, oh, what do you want me to do this? And the person's like, yeah, well, that would be a start. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it, right? Vin has this extreme prejudice against these people because he's around them all the time. He looks down upon them, like you said, and he's not getting past it. And Cisco basically just shakes it out of him. Because I think
Hmm.
from that moment on, he changes, right?
Yeah, he starts to change, and I think Cisco takes the bullet for him at the end, right? Because the
Yeah.
National Guard comes in and
Yep.
they actually shoot Cisco, and Cisco saves his life again. Um, and then he really changes,
Yeah.
after that, realizing like, oh yeah, how far we've come. So that was good because you see the person that is most calloused, uh, has the worst attitude throughout these two episodes. Um, treats them treats everyone in the sanctuary district the worst. He does a complete 180-degree turn, like at the end, and goes, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay, we really have to do something." So I thought, I, I thought, okay, that's coming to a good place. That's good.
Yeah. A little bit of redemption for that character, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we get this instance. So Michael Webb shows up
Hmm.
and Cisco introduces Michael Webb um to Biddle, and they're able to kind of, recruit some other gimmies, quote unquote, people that can be trusted to guard the hostages and watch over things and so forth. This is where now Dax sees this coverage and says, "Oh, I got to, she gets this idea from Chris
Yeah.
that, oh, well, maybe my friends might be in the sanctuary district. If they didn't have any ID, he's like, if they don't have any IDs or anything like that, they might have ended up in a sanctuary district." And so that's when she starts to investigate. And then she gets to the point where she says, "Oh," she learns that, well, they would have been in sanctuary district A because of San Francisco and so forth. And so she's like, "Hey, I got to get in there and help them." And so even though Chris is like, "Yeah, you might get hurt," she's like, "No, no, no. I got to hurt them. I hurt them, help them.
I
Excuse me,
gotta
not
get
hurt
them.
them. I
Yeah.
got to get there. I got to help them." We also see back on the Defiant, right, that Kira and Miles decide to make some, kind of guesstimated attempts at trying to figure out where they're at. They make some trips. I guess they have 10 different possibilities, but they only have enough for a few. And it looks like the first couple trips they make, one's like to maybe like the 1930s, one's
Hmm.
like the 60s or 70s with some hippies and stuff, which was kind of funny. And
That was
they
funny.
when they remember when they transport out and they're all like, "Whoa," like
Uh,
they're all like, "Oh, it's cool." Whoa, whatever they say. It was pretty
yeah, they
funny.
do. And I like that Kira and yeah, O'Brien have to give the peace sign back.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
get the
that's cute.
flowers and they do the peace symbol, but yeah. Um, yeah, but yeah, so they're trying to find him, whatever, and Biddle is really angry that that these gimmies are guarding the hostages. But again, Cisco is playing this part of, look, you got to have people you can trust, right? And how many ghosts do you know that you can trust? And he's like, Now that I think about it, one, me, something like that is what he says,
That's
right? And
right.
so you know, I think Biddle learns really quickly that Gabriel Bell, aka Cisco, is someone that he can trust, at least for the purposes of that they're on the same side in this whole thing. And I actually think that begins not only to like Gabriel Bell, but begins to have some level of respect for him.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he does. Um, and and you see that level of respect because at the end when the guard is coming in and I guess storming the place, like, he's there. He's there to help. He doesn't just like run away.
Yeah,
Um, he doesn't last that long, but at least he's there to help and do
yeah,
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because the whole plan of Biddle was either going to run away and get out of
Mhm.
there and get a free flight. He wanted to go to Tasmania, which is the
Tasmania. Yeah.
birthplace of Errol Flynn, which my grandmother would absolutely love because Errol Flynn was her guy, still is like her favorite of all time, and just loves him. So it's kind of funny, but
Yeah.
yeah. So they're like, no, we're not going to just run away and get out of here, scot free. Like we need to make sure that they close these sanctuary districts down, that people get jobs, and that they reinstate this federal employment act that they mention in this episode, which really is the idea of it was the suspension of legislation sometime before 2024 is what occurred, and that by shutting that down, it would make it to where unemployment wasn't considered basically an illegal condition,
Mhm.
right? But it was one of the demands of the people of the sanctuary district during these riots, and so what I found interesting was that Cisco actually convinces Michael Webb to be this person to speak to the outside world. I think he even says something to the effect of
Mhm.
like, he tells Biddle, is like, yeah, look, he's got a family. He's like, he's got that face, right? He just projects this face of, whatever, compassion or something like that. And so they try to do that, but unfortunately, the police break off the connection for the feed.
Yeah, it's terminated pretty quickly after that. And
Yep.
then you get into the sequences where you have the San Francisco police detective kind of reaching out to them and starting negotiations and that going back and
Yeah.
forth and you know the negotiations start like going okay. She's like, well, why don't you give up a hostage? And Cisco's been pretty much no, no, we're not going to give up a hostage. We need to close down the sanctuary districts and that she's like thinking, well, that might be like a hard thing to do. And apparently she's in conversations with the governor and um like a little bit further down the line in their conversation, she's like, well, yeah, well, governor said he'll set up a committee to talk about like what should be done with the sanctuary districts and which is pretty much like doing nothing. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And they know that. They know that's just all
Yeah.
talk. It's nothing, right? And I find it interesting too, right? So later, the guards are sleeping, and Vin tries to get up and leave, and
Hmm.
he tries to, he alerts everybody, and it's like I'm sitting there thinking to myself, come on, dude, for real, like you don't shut your mouth. Now you're trying to do something. You're going to get people killed, and
Yeah.
thankfully, Cisco's able to convince Biddle to not shoot him. Right? There's this really big, intense standoff between Cisco and Biddle and Vin. And it's really intense. You're like, okay, is Vin really going to get shot now? Is he going to die and everything else? And then eventually Cisco's able to talk Biddle down. And that's when he
Yeah.
says something like, all you gimmies, none of you gimmies have a sense of humor or whatever. And, um, but Cisco's adamant. He knows that any hostages can't die. Otherwise, this whole thing might be for nothing. And they've got those hostages have to survive because they've got to be able to show the outside world and tell the outside world what's going on, what happened in there.
Hmm.
That that people their lives were saved by the people who were taking them hostage, and that the National Guard didn't save them; it was the people inside, and really shine a light on the situation. So he knows the significant importance of this event,
Yeah.
and so that's really critical. Uh, and Vin is just he's a piece of work, man.
Vin is Vin. Vin is Vin.
He
Dax,
yeah he's
yeah.
yeah.
Dax is able to get in there, right? So that
Yes.
she's able to get in there and um see them, so that's good. And Biddle, of course, is enamored by Dax and was like hoping, oh yeah, I think, of course.
But I mean, if you were Biddle, wouldn't you be enamored by her too? I mean, she's beautiful, so why
Of
wouldn't you be?
course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and she's able to help on what she's able to help with, which is get them connection like to the network. Because I think she's able to go back and convince Chris to say, hey, Chris, no, we need to do something. And he's, it's a big ask what she asks him. And, to his credit, like, he's like, okay. I mean, this is pretty much, if it fails, well, pretty much he could lose his business, like,
Well, yeah, he says
essentially.
he's like, I'm going to lose my license for this or
Yeah.
whatever, which I guess was a big deal, right? Given the type of business he had.
Yeah. And so they do that, and that allows like a whole bunch of residents there in the Sanctuary District kind of share their story out to the world, out to their version of the internet right there.
Yeah, it's true. Dax comes through big and is able to convince, this Chris guy is a pretty good dude. If I must say so
Hmm.
myself, this Chris dude's a good guy. Um, and it's he really sticks his neck out big time to help Dax and get them. These people are getting their stories out, right?
Yeah.
They're getting the exposure to tell people, hey, look, we're just, this is what's going on, this is what happened, and everything, and Dax needs to go find her communicator because that's going to be some type of beacon to find them to beam up. Bashir goes and helps him. We get a cameo from none other than Clint Howard in this episode. He's the guy who has the communicator who thinks he's seeing aliens, and
Yes.
Dax convinces him that she's an alien. We know she is, but
Yeah.
that she needs a communicator back to protect Earth. And of course, he gives it to her. But that's, yeah, Clint Howard, which we know as a kid in the original series. And he's been in Enterprise. He made a lot of cameos in Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, and everything else. So it was cool to see him in that.
He does the whoosh. I'm invisible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, you can still see me. They're like,
Yeah.
Bashir's like, just barely.
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 Yeah.
So yeah, so she gets her communicator back. She leaves, goes back to convince
Mhm.
Chris to override the government, I guess, some kind of government feed or whatever that he's able to do, and they're able to get the word out. But then, unfortunately, the negotiations that they try to do with this representative of, I don't know if she's a representative of the governor or something like that, or some kind of negotiator, right?
Yeah, she's the police detective. I think she's San Francisco police.
Oh, okay.
But what was interesting because the exchange between her and the governor, and she's just kind of talking about it, but the rumors are going out, and then there's fear by those in power, like, hey, the truth is going to come out. What do we need to do? Okay, we need to do something. We got to lock this down because the police detective, she's kind of advocating for the residents of the sanctuary district a little bit. She's like, give me more
Yeah.
time. It's going to be okay. Give me more time. We don't want to go these drastic measures. But the governor kind of makes a decision to say, oh, we're going to send in the guard. We're going to do this.
I think the governor's decision is politically motivated, right? Because we don't
Yeah.
know the situation he's in. He could be a first time governor. We don't know, but there's the chances that if he lets this go on, maybe it affects his chance at being reelected. So it's a for the governor, it's a huge political move. I think he's got to end this and end it now so that it doesn't get out of hand and happen under his watch because that could affect his image, which could affect his ability to remain in office. I think that's
Yeah.
what the motivation is behind that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's a great point because things like that, right? The political ambitions or political fear, all of those types of things cloud the objectivity. Well,
Yes.
what is the right thing for these people in this circumstance for everybody? So that's a great point that you made.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to do what's right for the people. He was trying to do what's right for his own political image and then to quell it so that the citizens didn't get out, they didn't cause an uproar over what was going on. I mean, it wasn't done with the right intentions. I,
Yeah,
I I don't think. I mean, they don't tell us that, right? But I think that's just me kind of thinking into it
you
and
can
diving
infer
into it a
it.
little bit. Yeah,
Yeah, for
I think
sure.
some inference there for sure. Yeah. Um, but it doesn't work, and he tells her, nope. Yep. National Guard. She gets off the phone with him and she's like, yep, nope, National Guard's coming in and the governor's made the decision.
Yeah.
So we know that obviously the historical events are playing out as they're supposed to, right? If you knew the events ahead of time, you know that that was going to be the decision anyways,
Yeah.
because you already know kind of what's supposed to happen according to history. And so, you know, the everything's barricaded in. They're preparing. They're preparing. Dax or not Dax. Miles and Kira finally have one last opportunity to beam into the right place. Miles is like, "Yep, that's my best educated guess," and he just happens to pick the right one, of course. And they beam to the right location, and they're able to get a hold of Dax, right? And so from there, then you see the riot begin to happen, right? The National Guard comes in, and unfortunately, they shoot Michael Webb,
Mm.
which is really sad. He dies. They shoot
Biddle. Biddle
Biddle.
dies, yeah, very
He
fast. Yeah.
dies. Cisco is also shot, but he doesn't die, obviously. And they're able to get out of there. And I found it interesting too, because again, history plays out, right? The National Guard leader comes in, and Vin, of course, is now changed, and he's like, "What are you doing? What's going on? Blah blah blah." And he's like, "We got it." And I'm a government. I'm an employee or whatever. What are you doing? And he says, "Well, we heard that the hostages were all killed." He's like, "I'm one of the hostages. We're all alive," or blah blah. Whatever
Yeah.
the phrase is, right? And that was really important because all the hostages survive.
Yeah.
All the hostages survive.
Yeah.
Um,
And all the
and
all
that's
so
yeah,
many of
that's
the messages got out too, from the residents of the district.
yeah, yeah, that's true. It really is. And so they all get out, and that scene at the end, Chris, where they're on the steps as they walk out, as they decide to, he decides to help them out of the sanctuary district, um, is really powerful, right? Where they say something to the effect of like, um, he Vin is looking around. They walk out, right, and they see a bunch of dead bodies because the National Guards come in and killed hundreds of people, just like it was
Yeah.
supposed to happen, right? And he says something to the effect, right, of like, how do we let this happen, or how do we get here, or whatever. And Bashir says, "Well, the question really is how do we prevent this from happening again?"
Yeah.
The idea, because you think about it, the phrase is kind of cliche, but it's true. People say it all the time. Well, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. But it's true, and I think that's what Bashir's getting at. If you don't learn from this, it's gonna happen again.
Hmm.
Because I think that's the idea of the human nature. The human nature left to its own devices will turn into anarchy.
Hmm.
So that's a powerful, powerful message, I think. And I like the phrase right at the very end, which is the last words that they spoke. Again, I'm quoting this right from Memory Alpha,
Yeah.
where Bashir says, Commander, having seen a little of the 21st century, there is one thing I don't understand. How could they have let things get so bad? And this is when they're back on the Defiant,
Hmm.
and he's come to Cisco's quarters. And Commander Cisco says, "That's a good question. I wish I had an answer." Even he doesn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, here he is. He's in the future. He's got all the history books there, but even he doesn't know.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. I think that when watching this episode, and I'm curious in your thoughts, we go back to kind of the beginning here when we first started talking about this. Here we are in the period of time that this episode takes place, 2024, between August 30th and September 3rd. And I look at this and I think to myself, there's parallels here. We have sanctuary cities in the United
In the
States.
United States, we do. Yeah.
We don't have districts, but we have sanctuary cities. And they're not to the same extent, although having lived in California, I saw some of this firsthand in San Francisco and LA and places where it's out of hand.
Hmm.
There are places in California that literally look like third world countries.
Hmm.
And I think to myself, there is this going on, but they're not confined into spaces. You have the government, which may not doesn't maybe seem like they want to spend the money to take care of people who are in need with mental illness and
Hmm.
certain things like that. And so they're on the streets, they're not in a sanctuary district, but there's a lot of stuff that you see maybe in the sanctuary district in this episode that are actually happening in real life.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so there's a lot of parallel to that, right? I think we're dealing with a lot of the same issues that you see in Star Trek's 2024 San Francisco.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we
But on a
sure are.
on a national scale, right? These large, massive things that we as a country are dealing with.
Hmm. Yeah, we definitely are. And it's interesting because if you think about like our country and all of the systems that are involved, like in our country, you think that, hey, we're going to infuse a certain amount of programs or a certain amount of funding or a certain amount of money or some certain amount of resources into to one like effort, like um one huge like project,
Yeah,
one huge cause. You never really know what's going to happen because it has like different effects. You
right.
might have people that uh um have a great benefit, but then you might have a segment of the citizens that are really adversely affected, right? To that it and it wasn't like their fault. Um but now they're in this circumstance where they are in a much worse position than they were in before than they
Yeah,
were
and
in
I don't.
before.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I don't think just throwing money at a problem is gonna fix it. Like
Hmm.
people think, oh, just throw more money and that'll be the solution. That'll fix it. It's not the the issue. Last year, I think I read somewhere California spent billions of dollars on the homeless situation in the state, and it got worse.
Hmm.
It's not always a money thing. To me, we go back to this episode, right? We think of the idea of who Vin was, right? He had no empathy, no sympathy. He looked down on people. I think it's not just a money thing. I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's a policy thing. I think it's a mindset. I think it's an empathy, a simple like there's so many things I think that go into tackling situations like what is presented in this episode
Hmm.
that it's not just a hey, let's just keep throwing scads of money at it and that'll help it. I mean, yes, money can help, but only if you're using that money correctly
Hmm.
and you use it in the right way. It goes back to the very fundamental of human nature and the very fundamental of this idea of how do we help out our fellow man. And I look at how we are in 2024 right now, Sunday, September 1st, at the time of this recording, 2024. I don't think we're any better off than they were in the Star Trek's 2024. I really don't. If in certain instances, I just don't think we're better off. I think we're in the same situation, just in a different way.
Mm.
That's just my own personal opinion.
Hmm.
But I
Interesting.
look at what you see in the sanctuary cities, and you can see that in a lot of the major cities all over the United States. They're just not confined into a space like they are in the sanctuary districts in this two-part episode.
Hmm.
But you can see that. And the question is, how do we fix that? How do we pick ourselves up as humanity out of these situations and continue to work towards that um utopian positive view of what the future could be like in Gene Roddenberry's vision. How do we get to that point as humans, as a species? I don't like to use that because, you know, but whatever. As humans, how do we get ourselves closer to how they are in Star Trek? Would they overcome, war, poverty, disease, hunger, all that type of stuff that we're currently dealing with as humans across this planet? It's This episode shines a lot of light on societal issues that we continue to deal with today, that we're plagued with today, that's no different than what they were dealing with in Star Trek's version of 2024.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. And what the
So I'm
episode,
curious, Chris, what do you think on that? I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think what the episode kind of shares or believes is that there are things that can definitely make the problem like worse. Those things like um increasing the level of disconnectedness like around people, right?
Yeah.
No matter how connected we are with technology, um, losing the focus on human to human interaction will make the problem worse, of course. Um, and now, like we, even though we don't have sanctuary districts per se, you have people that are, you know, affected, like really, really adversely affected to no fault of theirs, in different socio like economic parts of our country.
Yeah.
Um, you know that maybe they were affected by the housing market crash. You had a whole lot of people, you know,
There was a
that,
lot of I had family members that
oh,
were affected by that back in
right,
2008. Yep.
yeah, that just they totally lost their homes,
Yep.
and that was just they were trying to get a home by the only means available that the market had at that time, right? And
Yeah.
it wasn't it wasn't a good solution there. But that was out of their control, right? Totally out of their control. But losing that, then they got into like hard financial situations, hard family situations. And then there was a level of, you know, like disconnect. Heard about it like in the news plenty, but um, you know, not as much like face to face like awareness. Unless you knew someone, of course, that you knew someone personally that was affected.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of you know, challenges certainly that we're going through now. Um, and you're right. They're not we don't make it as discreet as a sanctuary district, but
Right.
but there are people like around that are just trying to make it day by day that are affected and then that are down on their luck, and then there's no visibility towards them or they are ignored. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, because
yeah.
today, right, you'll see these types of societal issues. They'll appear on the news, right? They'll be little like, oh, this is going on. You'll see clips of that, and then it'll be on to the next thing, and you're like, okay, yeah, and it's out of sight, out of mind,
Hmm.
right? For the
Yeah.
for the for majority of us, it's out of sight, out of mind. Unless you're living around it day to day, maybe you're not thinking about it, and so it's just the same as being in the high class in these episodes where you're living in normal society and everybody else in these sanctuary districts, and they're out of sight, out of mind. You don't think about it day to day.
Yeah.
So we may not have the walls of the sanctuary districts, but I think you made a great point. We have the walls of connectedness or
Hmm.
lack thereof.
Yeah.
And when you see an image or you see something that you on social media as you scroll through on your feed, you're not connected to that in the same way you would be as if you were out and you were seeing those people in person, you were living around it. It's not the same. So I think you're right about that. The connectedness is almost our own version of sanctuary
Hmm.
districts.
Hmm.
We have walled off people because of that, I think, to a certain extent. The question is, where do we go from here? As a society, as human beings, where do we go from here in our 2024 to try and ensure that some of the events that we see in Star Trek's 2024 does not happen, or the stuff that's happening now doesn't get worse, and we can
Hmm.
improve upon that? That's really an open-ended question for those of you watching or listening. It's how do we get better? And you don't have to be in the United States of America. If you're listening around the globe to us, and we do appreciate you all over the globe listening and watching, but how do you and your in your area in your society, how do you get better? How do we do that? That's I don't know that I don't think I have an answer to that yet. Not something I mean, I've thought about it, but maybe not to the extent I have to where, oh yeah, if you do these and these, that would make it better because I don't know that I could prove that. But that's really kind of I guess an open-ended question I want to leave people with, Chris, is
Hmm.
what can we do to to follow in the footsteps of what Bashir said, which is to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So how do we make things better than what they are now as a society, and how do we make sure that those things don't happen again? Besides just learning from history, so we don't
Hmm.
repeat it, right?
Hmm.
Um, I
And
think that question rings really really loudly that Bashir asks.
it does, and it is a has to be a combination of people,
Yeah,
right? Just like what Cisco said. Cisco didn't know. He wasn't sure. So
Yeah.
um, it's a combination of people and their ideas bringing together that'll elevate the rest of society.
And honestly, I mean, if we're being honest, if we as a society are sitting around waiting for the government to fix it, it's it's not the answer. I think as a society, we have to come up with the solutions, right? And not wait for a governing body to fix it for us. I think we have to be a part of the solution.
Absolutely.
Now, how do we
Absolutely.
do that? I don't know, and I know we're kind of presenting a situation or a problem without a solution, but that's because I don't think anybody has really found the solution yet. Um, the question becomes, Chris, where do we go from here on September 1st, 2024? Where do we go from here? Do we go the route of the World War III that takes place in Star Trek, right? A few decades later from this moment in Star Trek timeline? Or do we go a route that gets us away from something like that and more towards the idea of working towards that Star Trek future, right? Of us as humanity working together for the common good.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know which route we take, but really it's ultimately up to us for us to improve our future or for us to not allow our future to get better and get worse. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's tricky situation, but these episodes really shine a light. I mean, obviously it's cool that we're literally crossing paths with Star Trek right now
Hmm.
in our time. But it does really present a significant issue/issues that I really think that this helps to call attention to, and maybe across the Trek universe of fans, that it's something that gets people into action and starting to do things to help make things better. I guess if that makes sense. It's very vague. I know what I'm saying. I think it's very talking in vagueness here, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Increasing, this sounds corny, but definitely increasing, like you said, empathy and kindness and compassion is a strong start.
Yeah,
Right?
like
So
Cisco said, it's a start.
it's a start. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
is.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
What,
well, I must say, my friend, this was a fun
yeah.
introspective. It was a very unique thing that we could sit here and talk about a Star Trek episode that occurs at the same time period in which we are experiencing right now. Um, it really is. And so if you are watching or listening to us all over the globe or the interwebs, I hope that this was fun for you too. I hope that if you're a Star Trek fan, or even if you're not a Star Trek fan and you haven't seen these episodes, go back and watch them. Or if you have seen them, go back and watch them again, and really pay attention to the things that they talk about and deal with, because I think they're very, very relevant for us today in our 2024.
Absolutely they are. That's
Yeah.
right.
Now, that being said, next weekend, for the time of this recording, we're going to be diving into a season 1 episode of Battlestar Galactica called Litmus, which is going to be in a wonderful episode that deals with the dissection of leadership of under Commander Adama aboard the Battlestar Galactica, and a myriad of other things that take place during this episode, and this tribunal that happens, that I think will be a lot of fun to discuss. And this will be our first BSG deep dive, which I'm really
Will
excited
be.
about, Chris.
Yeah, I'm totally excited. Like, as you know, I've been on the Battlestar Galactica watching trend for like a while now, so
Yeah.
it's been awesome, man. It's been
Yep.
excellent.
And I'm almost done with my rewatch of season 1. Then I'll move to season 2, and
It's
I got to
awesome.
pick back up and start watching some more episodes, because my goal is to finish it before the end of October, going to Chicago for the BSG 20th anniversary convention. So I want to finish it before then. So got to kick it in gear a little bit and start watching. At least if I watched one episode a night, I'd be done before the convention.
Copy. Yeah.
Um, because there's only like 11, 12 episodes a season or something like that. It's not like Star Trek where there's 20 something in the legacy stuff, and 7 seasons. So yeah, I got to pick that back up. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. It
Nice.
should It'd be a blast. I mean, I always love. I think one of my most favorite things we do is when you and I deep dive
Yeah,
episodes
me
of
too.
stuff or movies or whatever. It's we get some really fun introspective ideas. And this episode really is this episode of or two-part episode of DS9 really is introspective, right? It really makes you look inward and say, what am I doing? How could I be better as a contributing member of society? How could I do things better? How could I make my community better? Right? And talk is cheap, guys. So how do we actually put things into action versus just talk about it?
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. So, anyways, but yes, thank you so much as always, everybody, for watching and listening all over the globes and the interweb. I know, as you said, Chris, it's been a little while. We were busy with travel and
Yeah.
work and things like that, but we're gonna keep chugging along, keep doing this, and recording and making episodes and content for you guys as often as our professional lives will allow us to. And so, in the meantime, be sure to go on to Facebook and Instagram. Check us out there. Follow us there for the latest updates, announcements, and so forth. Upcoming episodes and things like that. We've got a lot of great stuff planned coming up here as we continue to wind down the latter part of season 6 of the podcast and prepare for season 7, which is
Wow.
the seventh season. That's like the last season of a legacy Trek shows, or most
Yeah.
of them. So we gotta think about what. Not, it's not gonna be our last season, guys. Don't worry. But it's just as we think through this, I did want to mention one thing, Chris. I saw this
Yeah.
really quickly on Memory Alpha. This little kind of Easter egg here that the first the first time period in which Kira and O'Brien beam into as
Mhm.
they're looking for Cisco, Bashir, and Dax is kind of the 1930s, and there apparently is a boxing poster in the background, and apparently
Oh.
it's the same boxing poster that appears in The City on the Edge of Forever, which was an Easter egg hint to say that
Oh.
Kira and O'Brien were on Earth at the exact same time as Kirk and Spock.
Oh, that's cool. I had
Right?
no idea on that. That is
So
awesome.
apparently, according to Memory Alpha, Doug Drexler said that the poster was included because while he was reading the script, he realized the scene featuring time travelers popping into an urban setting was almost identical to the one in the city in Edge of Forever. He excitedly relayed this to this observation to Michael Kuda, and they realized a reproduction boxing poster could be inserted into the DS9 scene seamlessly. So there you go. Kira and
Nice.
O'Brien were on Earth the same time as Kirk and Spock.
That's
How
awesome.
cool is that?
That makes me feel good.
If yeah, and if none of you knew that, we didn't know that either until we read this on Memory Alpha. So go on Memory Alpha and read it because it's fantastic. It's the Star Trek uh, digital encyclopedia of everything Trek with tons of hyperlinks. You could get lost on Memory Alpha just going through hyperlinks and reading stuff. Anyways, thank you
Nice.
always so much for watching, everybody, and listening all over the globe interwebs. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to our next episode where we deep dive the season 1 BSG episode, Litmus, coming soon. Take care, everybody, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Random Redshirt Podcast.